Welcome to this week of the Golf Performance Show. On episode 4, we're going to be talking about the Genius of Ben Hogan, and in particular his book here, Ben Hogan's 5 Lessons. To me, probably the most important golf instruction book that you'll ever come across. I'd highly recommend picking up a copy of it. Ben Hogan, to me, is one of the first golf coaches of all time that really broke down the keys to greatness, becoming a great ball striker. I would also just like to mention that I have a 3-month mentorship right now. There is a bit of a waiting list, so if you click the link below, you'll be able to get early access to it if you're listening to the show. My 3-month mentorship online is really something for me that is a dream mentorship in my opinion, because you're going to get 24/7 access to me. You're going to get 6 lessons out of it, and then over 20 guides on how to improve every little aspect of your game. My big thing when you're working with me online is that you're going to get a custom mentorship that really gets to the root of why you're struggling with your swing. So we're going to start with stuff like how to hit it straighter, how to hit it more solid, and then eventually lead to hitting it longer. And we're going to cover stuff like fitness, course management, putting, chipping, biomechanics, TrackMan. There's really nothing that I'm not going to cover with your game, because I believe if we look at all those things, we're going to find where the deficiencies are. And then from there, we can build a plan that'll really help you level up your game. It's not out of the question to see shot improvement about 7 to 10 shots in a 6-month period. I really believe that this is the case for most of the golfers that I work with, because I've seen it happen so many times before. So check out the 3-month mentorship in the show notes. Okay, so let's get right into it. We're talking about Ben Hogan this week, one of my heroes. So let's just list off a little bit of what Ben Hogan has done in the game. He's won 9 major championships, and he's won 63 PGA Tour events. In my opinion, one of those guys that really needs to be put up in the category with Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods. And it really was the style of Ben Hogan, the way he dressed, the way he approached his craft, his story, where he came from, struggling for 10 to 11 years, really not finding his game, making no money at all, and then eventually finding his game and then becoming one of the best ball strikers of all time. Hogan released this book here that I'm going to talk about. You heard me mention the 5 Lessons of Ben Hogan. If you go and see a coach anywhere, a local PGA pro, they probably base all their coaching on these 5 fundamentals. This is something that's been kind of, these lessons have been given through the ages with golf, and it's something that still works to this day. Like a lot of the stuff that he goes through in his 5 major lessons is something that I work with on a daily basis. I know a lot of great coaches that work with it, and I think it's important to just understand that if we can master the basics, then it's going to take you a really far way. And I really do believe we don't have to get into this complex stuff that can make your head spin. So, Hogan is really big on that. And let's just get right into it here. Hogan's big thing is that it's utterly impossible to play great golf without a swing that repeats, obviously. And everyone is looking for consistency. And, to me, consistency is something meaning that you have a swing that you can rely upon over and over again under pressure. And if you have that sort of feeling that you can really rely on your swing, the feel of your swing, it's much easier to play great golf. So, to get that to that point where it's repeating, right? Repeating is a really key word. Every golfer needs to go through a stretch where they simply try to just stack reps. I know for me personally, I went through a period when I rebuilt my game 5 to 6 years ago after not having played for 5 years, where I was, making it a goal for myself to hit as many balls as possible. Some days it was 400 balls, some days it was 500 balls. Light days were 100 to 200. And my body hurt, and it sucked, and my hands were always bleeding, and then there was always times where I felt like my body was going to break down, and at times it did. But I definitely think it's important that if you want to raise your level of your game, you have to either approach it through playing a ton or practicing a ton, or both, ideally. So Hogan was, known as one of the first range rats. He was a guy that spent hours and hours and hours at a range trying to master his swing. So it's laborious trial and error. Hogan did it this way. He really, the term of digging it out of the dirt, there's no one better than Hogan at really embodying this. So he believed the average golfer is capable of building a repeating swing and breaking 80 if he learns to perform a small amount of correct movements. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Hogan believed that you don't need to know a great deal about small little pieces. You need to know a little bit about the really important things, and those things are going to really propel you forward. So, I personally think, from what I've learned, especially in the Scott Koch school, that if we look at, what are the big key major movements of any great elite pro, the 3 big things that I always come back to is, is your spine staying in its tilt? Are you rotating your torso enough? And then are you shifting your lower body? So the 3 major movements that I'm always going to look at when someone comes in for a lesson is their spine staying in its tilt? Are they rotating their torso, and then are shifting their weight towards the target? If you master those 3 simple movements, you're going to be a lot better off. And I just want you to encourage you to look at your swing and look for those 3 movements and see if one of them is off. Like if you don't see your left hip for a right-handed golfer go towards the target, then it typically means your hips are going to be spinning. You're not getting a proper shift. If you see yourself early extending and really popping your head up as you come through, then that's a problem as well too. It's not about really keeping the head down. It's more about staying in your posture. The next thing would be rotation. Like typically slicers are going to be over rotating their shoulders, and drawers are going to be under rotating their torso as they come through. So let's get into the next concept with Hogan. Good golf for him, it comes from having a good grip, and I think that's absolutely essential. You're going to hear me talk a lot about the hands and the grip throughout the life of this podcast, because I think if your hands are in the right spot and if you have a really good sense of feel with them, then it becomes much easier to time up the club face. And Tiger talked about this. All the greats talk about how the hands are really important. So, just kind of, you're going to have to, if you're listening in the car or you're listening as you're cleaning the house, you're going to have to visualize this a little bit, but I would encourage you to maybe watch the video a little bit and just kind of, I'll bring you through a couple of things that I think about. I don't have a club in my hand, but we'll do our best to visualize. So, the grip really goes through the lifeline here. So Hogan believed that with his lead hand, it went right through here, and not so much in the palms, not deep in the fingers, but kind of at the base of the fingers. And that is really where you get the most support, where you can wrap your hand around the club in the most proper way. So, in the fingers, not in the palms, that's a huge thing. The lead hand, right? So my left hand, if I'm a right-handed golfer, the back of my glove logo, I want it pointing about 45 degrees right of the target. You could also look down at your hand and see this little V that you create with your thumb and your index finger, and you want that V pointing at your right shoulder. Another way to look at it would be like, I want to see pretty much 2.5 knuckles where I can see my index, my middle finger, and then a little bit of my ring finger as well too. So if you can see that, then you have generally a bit of a stronger grip. You could also look at the V in your right hand that's created by the thumb and the index too, and you want that pointing at the right shoulder. So again, we're getting a little bit into the technical areas. You might have heard that before with your grip, but if your grip is not in the right spot, then it's worth considering changing it. Now, it's important to understand that the grip relates to your wrist angles. Like for me personally, I'm a little bit more of a neutral, even sometimes weak grip at times, but I have quite a bit of an excess bow in my hands, and that causes me to be able to shut the face appropriately. I get some guys that are very strong, and then they really roll their hands open in the takeaway and they hit slices. So the wrist angles in relation to the grip really matter. Firm grip pressure was a huge thing for Hogan. If you have tighter hands on the club, then you're really going to be able to stabilize that club face better. And you might have heard in the past from better golfers or pros to grip it nice and softly, but what most of those pros or better players don't understand is that they're gripping it at a much firmer rate than you are typically. Like, the way a tour pro would apply pounds of force to a grip handle is a lot higher than you would. It's almost double the amount. So the tighter you get the grip on, tighter you grip the club, the more you're going to stabilize the club face, and you're going to actually swing faster from it, right? So why not take something that's going to help you hit it longer and also hit it straighter? That's for sure the case. Pressure points in the hands. Hogan was big on this too, and I really think this allows for you to stabilize the bottom of the club. So if you stabilize the under part of the grip, it's not as easy for that club to twist in your hand. So you look at your pinky, your ring finger, middle finger. If you get these three a little more firm on the club, right? As you can see, I'm kind of making a gun sign right here. These three fingers on your lead hand, so imagine I'm a right-handed golfer, this is my left hand, I want that to be a lot tighter. And then on my trail hand, my underhand, bottom hand, it would be the ring finger and then the middle finger. So you get these really tight, that stabilizes the under part of the club, right? So it almost makes like a Spider-Man symbol or a rock symbol right there. So you can even practice making swings with just holding on to the club with your pressure points. I'll actually even hit shots this way sometimes, and that really improves my grip strength. It also just stabilizes the club head a little bit more. I would definitely encourage you to do that drill. And also, see if you can actually do one-handed drills where you're holding it at the pressure point and hit a few light shots that way. It'll definitely improve your coordination and sense of feel for where the club head is at. And to me, that's everything, is getting the proper sense of feel. So we talked about the V's pointing to the right shoulder. So, grip dictates the face angle and the wrist. So small changes can mean big differences to ball flight changes. Like I always look at the grip and I look at the wrist angles as, salt on a steak, right? Like we don't want to put the whole salt shaker on the steak. We want to put just a little bit of a pinch on it to make sure we get the right amount. So if I take my grip and change it from neutral to strong, that could mean a 30 to 40 yard hook. And if I take my grip and go from neutral to weak, that can mean a 30-yard slice. So I'll get a lot of guys coming in and showing me what they worked on with their grip, and they're changing it. They're going from here and cranking it really shut. I know I've done that many times before in the past, and all of a sudden I can't control my golf ball. So like the smallest little bit of subtle change can have a huge impact on your ball flight. Now, there are other things, you've probably heard this concept before of feel versus real. There are certain things like, when you're working on your weight shift, or you're working on your rotation, or you're working on the depth of your backswing, that's when you really want to over feel things, because it's hard to change the big movements. But the small stuff, that's where you just want to be very careful with making sure you're not making too big of a change. So we'll this is not really in the Hogan book too much, but we'll talk about different styles of grips. I do think that the way you grip the club can have an impact on ball flight. So I played with all of them. I played 10 finger when I started out, and then I switched to overlap. I switched to interlock for about 6 months when I was a kid, and then I ended up getting really bad blisters, switched away from it, went back to overlap. And then when I came back to playing competitive golf in the last 6 years, I switched to interlock. I think a lot of it is based upon your release pattern. So for me, I tend to over release my hands and hit hooks. So the interlock just locks my hands together as the name describes, and it makes it easier for me to have a bit more of a cut finish looking like this, as opposed to a hook finish, where it's more the hands are whipping behind my body. So if you're just listening, the interlock grip allows it makes it a little bit easier for me for my hands to stay in front of the body and hold off the face angle, where the overlap grip makes it a little easier to release it and get the hands throwing behind it. So you gotta pick your poison. I think it's important to pick one and stick with it. 10 finger is not a bad idea either. I mean, Mo Norman, late in his career, one of the best ball strikkers of all time, I'm definitely gonna do an episode on him in the future. He switched back to 10 finger, and he found a lot of success with it. Mo Norman is definitely an eccentric too, so you gotta take that with a grain of salt. So one big thing that Hogan kept talking about in the grip chapter, he mentioned it a couple times, is anytime you make a change, you want to be practicing it 30 minutes a day, holding in the proper position for at least a week to get it to feel comfortable. So, I'll get someone come in their first lesson, and let's say their face angle is on average 6 to 8 degrees open with a driver, and they're hitting the slice off the world. That's the most common one I see. I'll get them to get their hand really strong on the club and get the right hand under, then work on shutting the face more in the backswing. And they're like, oh my God, this feels awkward, this feels uncomfortable. And no shit, it's going to feel really bad. And oftentimes the proper grip is going to feel very off. So I can get someone to the point where within 10 minutes, they've gone from hitting a 50-yard slice to hitting a nice 10-yard draw, but it feels awful. So I think the most irresponsible thing that a golf coach could do would be to change someone's grip right before a big tournament, before a big match. So I'll always say, take this home, maybe not even hit balls for a week, just go practice it into a mirror. If you're watching TV at night, grab the club in your hands and make these little changes. I know for me, like when I changed my grip during COVID, me and my wife would sit down at night and I would just hang out, and I would set my hands in this certain position, and I would just hold it there for like 30 minutes to an hour. And then about a week passed by and my interlock grip became very comfortable. So you got to practice your new grip like anything. You don't just put it in a new place and all of a sudden you're set. Typically the new proper grip is going to feel awful. At the start with grip, when I was coaching, when I started 5 or 6 years ago, I was very hesitant to change people's grip, because I would always get that immediate response that like, oh no, I don't like the feeling of this. This feels really awful. Kept sticking with it over a long period of time with making, I look at it this way. I wasn't seeing people change as fast as I wanted to. So I'm like, I got to be a little bit more bold here, and I got to be a bit more invasive and actually start tweaking people's grips. And now pretty much every lesson, unless they have, serious face angle, or if their face angle is good, which generally most people's face angle is not, I'm changing the grip or I'm changing the wrist patterns, because I want them to get a sense of feel as to where that club head needs to be square. Okay. So moving on to the next lesson here, lesson number 2 is stance and posture. So I kind of made about 9 to 10 points here of the things that I feel are very important. He has a stance chart in the book, which I find very fascinating, and I've coached a lot of people this way who have more struggles with their low point. So what low point is the bottom part of your swing arc. And if it's kind of jumping around a little bit, I'll see it on TrackMan, like if the consistency is plus or minus more than 2.5 degrees of consistency, then I want to change, or I want to use Ben Hogan's method, which is basically you have pretty much the same ball position throughout. And if you're listening to that, yeah, that is correct. You want the same ball position throughout from driver to wedge. And then you're going to change your stance based upon what club you're using. So for the driver, you're going to having your feet a little bit more shut off to the target and wider. And then for the wedge, you're going to be more open to the target with your feet and more narrow. I also think too, there's a pressure change that you need to make too with low point if you're going to go this route, where you need to feel like you're chipping with 80% of your weight on your lead side. When you're wedging, you're hitting wedges 70% on your lead side, hitting your irons 60% on your lead side, long irons and woods 55% on the lead side, and then driver 50-50. So that's a cool one. I've used that personally for myself, and I've seen a lot of consistency come from just feeling the ball in the same spot every time. And it goes against the grain of like, okay, you get the wedge in the middle, the 7-iron middle to front, and then the driver in the front. But I do find with that traditional method of middle to front, there's there could be a 6 to 12 inch change in your ball position based upon how big you are. And that, change in a low point all around like that, especially if you struggle with it, can cause a lot of issues on just where you feel the ball. Typically, you might get more shanks with the wedges than more toe hooks with the driver with that change in ball position. But I will still teach it that way. Some people are just, they've always learned it that way. If I were to have my way, if I was taking a brand new golfer, I'd probably just get them to have the same ball position every time. Feet under the shoulders, that was a big one for him, and that's a big one for me when I'm coaching anyone. Like, I want you to feel like your heels, imagine, like, it's hard to visualize here, but like this is my heel and this is the outer part of, or this is the in part of my foot, this is the outer part of my foot. I want the inner part of my foot under my shoulders. And that just allows you, it ensures to make sure that you're not swaying. So you might step up to a driver and it feels more athletic and it feels better to get a super wide stance. And yeah, it might provide more speed, but you're going to tend to have more swaying going on. And I find the spine starts to get out of control, where you're coming through the ball and your spine will start to fall behind the ball, and then you're hitting up on it too much and you're flipping the hands at it. So you also got to consider how tall you are. Like, I do find for bigger, taller players, it might be a bit better to be on a wider stance to lower your center of gravity. And then if you're a bit of a shorter player, maybe a bit more narrow, to raise your center of gravity. I also think just a good fit will do you wonders. Like, if you're 6'5", you should not be playing clubs that are off the rack. And if you're 5'7", you should not be playing clubs off the rack. Make those little adjustments. I'm 5'9", 5'10". I would say 5'10", just make myself a little taller, right? And I'll usually play clubs that are about a half an inch short, and that typically feels most comfortable for me. Even for like my putter, I'm 33 inches or 34 inches, which is typically stock, always feels very uncomfortable. So talking about the way the feet are set up, you want with your lead foot a quarter turn out, and then the trail foot just a little bit of turn. You want to make sure that you don't get that trail foot too turned out, which I don't often see, but it can happen sometimes. And then you get too trapped in the backswing, and typically you're going to early extend, and then the trail knee will tend to fly a little bit away from the target. Again, just causes more swaying. So I do find with that lead foot, especially if you have tightness in the hips, which I would say 80% of golfers do, getting that lead foot flared out a little bit makes it easier for your hips to get open. And that's a big thing for Hogan, is getting the hips, spinning from, not so much spinning, but shifting open from the top. Proper foot setup can really prevent swaying. So pressure on the inside of the trail heel, that's a big one for me. So if you think about, if you're a right-handed golfer, your right foot, the inner part of that foot, I want more pressure there so you can easily push off. And that makes me think of guys like Ken Venturi, famous golfer, where he took a shoe and actually sanded it like this so he could have more of a bank on a natural bank on his foot. So if you put the pressure on the inside of your trail foot, it makes it easier for you to push off and get towards the target. Next thing would be the lead arm. So I'd make a little bit of an exception against Hogan here, just some of the data that we've seen from stuff like the Golfing Machine and Bryson DeChambeau, and just what we see from modern day players. The lead arm, what I like about what Hogan says is it should be stiff and locked. That's for sure the case. Like, we don't want that lead arm being loose and relaxed. Like, you want it to feel, I'll take this from my coach, Scott Kaux, you want it to feel like a steel rod. I like, Hogan talks about it being a little more externally rotated, but I do like internal rotation. We'll kind of do a bit of a caveat here, right? Like, for drawers of the golf ball, it's better to have it internally rotated, and it's harder for that club to want to roll over. And then for slicers, let it feel a little more externally rotated so you can actually release the hands over, and it makes it easier to hit a draw. So you have to understand, what type of player you are. In order for the club to be on optimal playing, you must be extended. So he believed in having the arms nice and long and not jammed up in the body. And that one's pretty obvious. Rory McIlroy talks about that, where he really wants to try and feel like his wingspan is very expanded. A good way of visualizing that would be thinking of like one of those golf robots, or Bryson DeChambeau is very much like that, where the arms are very extended. He likes to feel, like Hogan talked about, making sure that the elbows, when you're setting up to it, are almost feeling like they're kissing. So you get the elbows tighter in your swing, and that makes it easier for the torso to want to rotate. So that's a big one as well too. And then the knees flex. So kneecaps over the bottom of the shoelace with a tall posture with a slight bend at the hips. If you go Google Tiger Woods' posture, and you're going to see a slight bit of knee flex where the kneecap looks like it's over the bottom shoelace in a straight line. And then there's just a little bit of hinge at the top. That little stuff alone is so important. Like I see guys come in that are newer to the game and they're really hunched over. It almost looks like their eyes are over the ball, and they're locked out with their legs. And then as soon as they pull that club down, they want to stand up to get out of the way of it. And then the opposite can be true too. You have way too much knee flex, your knees are out over your toes, and you're standing straight up with your spine. And then you're typically gonna, you always end up falling forward with bad posture. That's usually the case. I never see someone fall away from the golf ball. Okay, so let's move along here. I want to talk about P1 to P2. And this is some traditional advice that you don't hear a lot of golf coaches talk about. But I definitely think there's something to be said about it. Like if you look at the greats throughout the history of the game, and even modern day players, they all have some sort of specific waggle. And I think we've gotten away from the waggle in modern day because we want everything to feel very robotic and stiff. But golf is a game of feel, in my opinion, right? And like I'll see guys come in who are waggling like a slicer, for instance, and they're waggling and they just roll their hands back like this. And basically that little waggle that they're doing is ingraining a really bad habit to tell their body, hey, as soon as you pull the club back, you're going to suck it inside and open that club face up. So maybe you should consider having a waggle where you intentionally try and shut the face in the takeaway. Like I even think the way Justin Thomas does, where he does that little swing takeaway check, brings it back, that is some version of a waggle. So if you're a slicer of the golf ball, take it back, check your hands, and make sure they're a lot more shut as you come back as opposed to open. So again, if you're listening, just try and visualize that as much as possible. Like I'm more of a drawer of the golf ball, so I'll waggle and let my hands feel nice and loose to make sure that I'm not feeling that my hands get too shut. So, Hogan even talked about like the waggle should maybe change based upon the shot that you're hitting, right? So if you're hitting a soft little chip, you want a really soft, kind of slow, rhythmic waggle. And if you're trying to step up and hit a really hard drive, you want to do a firm waggle where you're almost bouncing a little bit more. Like you see Rory McIlroy do some sort of waggle like that, where he's almost bouncing. It looks very rigid. And that's because he's trying to pump himself up a little bit. Like I find for me, if I have to hook one around a tree, I'm going to let that club kind of, go way inside and really just get the feeling down. And it makes it easy for me to connect to my swing. And what Hogan is really getting at is the waggle is something that gets you into that flow state. It gets you into feeling the club as opposed to thinking about your swing. And that's the death of any golfer at any level, is to be thinking about your swing. The waggle will help you feel your swing. So practice a waggle. Have something that you do specifically every time and make it on a cadence. Like for me, I learned that when I set my club down, I look at the target, I do one quick little pump like this, I put the club down, and then I let it go. And that's something for me that I've practiced thousands and thousands of times. And it's really, made an improvement on just me feeling locked in at the target and not second guessing myself. Every time I work with a competitive player, I'll work on that with them and try and come up with some sort of trigger that they have. Usually the trigger is already built in, but if they tend to, like this is the case for guys and girls who are really good on the driving range and then really struggle on the golf course, it's probably because you're just not working on your cadence enough, okay? So this is a big one. I mean, it's something to consider to work on, and I think you want to work on this really slowly. And then you also want to think about it moving it as one unit. This is something Sam Snead talked about, but Hogan believed that the swing is initiated by the hands, then the arms and the shoulders and the hips in that order. So I'll say that again: hands, arms, shoulders, and hips. Something you want to drill into a mirror. I think that's important. Like if you're thinking, you're standing over the ball and you're thinking, okay, hands, and then I got to do my arms, and then my shoulders, then my hips. Like you're done at that point. So I'd recommend like getting in front of a full length mirror at home or hitting into a net of feeling all that in that sequence right there. Okay. So this is a big one for me: is do not suck the club. Hogan talked about this a little bit, but do not suck the club deep into the inside. If you do, the face angle needs to be shut. So we could look at guys like Victor Hovland, where he'll suck the club a little bit to the inside of his body on the way back. But the one thing that he makes sure that happens is his face angle stays shut as he does it. So if you're going to suck that club to the inside and the club face is open, then you're going to have to make some sort of compensation to get it back. Then you're going to typically have to flip the hands over, or you're going to over release the shoulder. So you could either get a hook or a slice from it. So you really got to be careful with that move. I would rather see that shaft line stay down the target line when you're at P2 in the takeaway. So we kind of mentioned this before. Last thing about the lower body and the takeaway is maintain the trail leg angle. So you should be, if you think about your legs in your setup are more turned inward, that trail leg is very important. Like if I see the trail leg, or look at it this way, the knee is inside the ankle to start with a proper stance. And if you turn back and that knee gets over the ankle and you sway backwards and the right hip goes away from the target for a right-handed golfer, that's a huge problem for me, because it typically means you're gonna have to make some sort of compensation to get back on it. You'll always see the best players in the world, they maintain their leg angle on the way back. They don't go like this, they turn around it, okay? So that's a really big one. The one big visual that Hogan has in his book is the plane of glass from, I want you to think about this slowly, from the ball all the way to your neck. And so there's this imaginary plane of glass, and you basically do not want to shatter it. If you look at what slicers do, they're often shattering that plane of glass, getting way too steep and then getting on top of it. So Hogan believed on, rotating around and staying under the plane of glass. I think a simple way to do this would be, you got to be careful with this one because you don't want to hurt yourself, but put an alignment stick out in front of your golf ball at about a 45-degree angle, and then just stay under it the whole time. Maybe just do some practice swings like that, just so you don't end up in the hospital and then you're blaming me for it. But go slow with that. The pane of glass is a really big one. And I would say that if you tend to have very shallow, you gotta be careful with this one, but if you have very shallow attack angle values, like your irons can tend to even be 0 to 1 degrees up at certain points, you wanna work on getting a little bit more steep and more high with the hands, like a Justin Thomas look. And then if you get really steep in your attack angle values are like -7, -8, -9, you want to think about a wider takeaway and getting more around your body, kind of like Hogan or Matt Kuchar, who are a lot more flatter. Hogan also, this is, gosh, I wish I could have really understood how important this was at a younger age, because I would have done this every day if I knew how important it was. And this is something I give to all my beginners. It's funny, I find that there's a lot of parallels in coaching beginners and coaching professionals, because the basics are really what matters the most. And Hogan believes in 9 to 3 swings. Half swings are very crucial because it gives you the feel of the most important part of your swing. Like a lot of golfers, spend a ton of time working on their top position and working on their finish, but really you can route the club in so many different ways. What really matters is that little window that you have from 9 to 3 o'clock, if you're thinking about a clock. So half swings are absolutely crucial. Okay, so the second part of the swing, we're talking about like the top of your swing all the way into the downswing into impact. Hogan believed that the hips started the downswing, but we do not want to just spin the hips open. So this one is a little bit disputed. You look at certain guys, like on the senior tour is a perfect example. I always like to reference senior tour golfers. Their hips are not on the target at impact, like spinning open perfectly, because they've lost mobility over time. They're a little bit tighter. They've had a lot of years on their body. So you got to just understand your limits. Like if you're very tight in the hips and you sit down all day at a desk job, you're probably never going to look like a PGA Tour player with your hips, but do your best to work on a drill. Like I will do a drill where I'll put my hands across my chest and then just try and open my hips and keep my shoulders in the same spot. And I do that in the gym. I really do find that better hip mobility comes from working on it in the gym. It doesn't come from forcing your body into those positions, because usually your body's just going to put you into survival mode. So Hogan believed the sequence was, and this is kind of opposite of the sequence in the backswing, it's hips, shoulders, arms, and then hands. Okay, I'll say that again. Hips, shoulders, arms, and hands. So what you could do is the mirror drill, where you start off with the backswing where you go hands, arms, shoulders, hips, and then you go hips, shoulders, arms, and hands in the downswing. You just work at really slow motion swings. A mentor of mine, a guy named John Stankov, absolute legend of a guy. I love him to death. He's a great coach, really good junior coach. And he would always get me to get in front of a mirror and do super slow motion drills and visualize the perfect impact. So you can think about going to the top of your swing, where you're going to go hips, and then you're going to go shoulders, and then arms, and then hands. And then just try and feel that over and over again and do it in a really slow motion way. Your body will learn that and it will translate it to the actual swing. What I see on a constant basis is that most amateurs start their downswing with their hands. So they get to the top and they just try and rip the hands down, because that's just how we're naturally wired to want to hit a ball with our hands. So you got to overcome that. It's basically the body first, and then the arms follow. So a good protocol for that, if you look at Dr. Kwan's work, would be the step drills. Do those where you pull the club back and you're already stepping into your finish. I like to think about other sports. Football is the perfect one, where a proper NFL quarterback is going to step into their throw and then release it, right? So you think about that, it's lower body, shoulders, and then the hand, and you can see that motion is actually very similar to the golf swing. So I think it even helps. Hogan talked about this, we're working on your sidearm, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit in the future. So, he talks a lot about the downswing plane, where great players are typically wider in the backswing and then they collapse it into impact. You'll see Bryson do these drills where he gets really wide in his backswing and then he kind of collapses the club a little bit. So that's another drill you could do. Also, you're going to see, like, Rory's the perfect example of this, where he goes a little bit outside of the target line and then drops it to the inside. That's another one you can do. You've probably seen even Justin Rose do a drill where he drops his hands almost into his pocket and he gets it feeling around himself. That's a drill that I do constantly. Like right now, for me personally, I'm working on getting my backswing very long, and I notice I'm more across the top that way. So I'll do swings where I go way over parallel, but then make sure I'm dropping it under. It's also worth understanding, if are you a planer versus a non-planer. Like planer would be Adam Scott, where it's on a beautiful symmetrical plane. That's why it looks so pretty to the naked eye. Then you have Rory, who's outside and then drops it under, like I mentioned. And then you have Viktor Hovland, who's in and then across the top. Typically, you want to, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but you want to mirror Viktor Hovland if you're more of a drawer of the golf ball, and you'd want to mirror Rory if you're a bit more of a fader of the golf ball. And obviously, we're all trying to look a little bit more like Adam Scott, which at times, isn't even worth chasing. Like, you just want to chase what's functional for you, right? So Hogan, I put this in cap locks because I think it's really important in my notes here. Trying to control the face at impact is faulty. He thinks about hitting the ball as hard as he possibly can, but this doesn't work for slicers. So I think if you're wanting to go this route of Hogan, where you don't want to try and control the face at impact, which I think is important, and then thinking about hitting the ball as hard as you possibly can. If I say, hey slicer, like, hit the ball as hard as you possibly can, they're going to drag that club so far across the top, and their club path value will probably go from like -5 to -9 degrees. So you want to, at least I think for about a 6-month period, if you're a slicer, is work on those under drills, kind of like Justin Rose, where you go a little bit outside and then drop it under. Get it to a point where you could put it on video and you're seeing your club drop in and be a little bit more shallow, right? The slow motion swings, practice swings, you got to get rid of the ball to get creative with it. I just saw an article come out, I think it was on Golf Digest, where Rory talked about hitting golf balls a lot into a screen just to feel his swing. I talked about it with a buddy of mine who's a professional golfer, and he kind of craves those times in the off season where he can just work on it. Because if you really want to change your technique, you got to get away from the ball. And that's why hitting into a net, hitting into a screen, whether that's blank or just doing practice swings at home, is the most effective way to change your swing. Try and fight me on that. I don't think it's possible to go to the range and really feel it out and hit great golf shots as you do it. Some people get lucky, but I find most do not. So the trail arm, the function of the trail arm is for the elbows to stay a little bit more in as you come in, and you can kind of see I'm making more of a shortstop throwing motion. It's interesting, I'm a lead arm dominant golfer, so I'm left-handed as a right-handed golfer, and I always found that motion very tough. I've actually worked on throwing a lot of tennis balls into my golf net to just get feeling what the elbow should feel like as I come into impact, and it's actually made a great improvement on my swing. I'll get to the top and feel more of this action right here with the hands shut, as opposed to what I'm doing here, if you're just listening, is getting the elbow in a little bit more. So at impact, so back of the left hand, the lead hand for a right-handed golfer. It's funny, there weren't many lefties in those days, so they didn't even care for the crossover. We'll do it as a lefty. So for the back of the right hand, or for a righty, back of the left hand, the left hand should supinate a little bit. So you look at your swing and go through the list we've laid out and ask yourself, am I in this position or not? Then drill it without thought until it is ingrained. So that's really important. It's just, I'm giving you a lot of technical advice right now, and I always like to say this as a coach, be careful with it, because I don't want you to have more than 2 swing thoughts at a time. Go through the list of everything that I'm talking about and pick the ones that are really, pick 1 or 2 that are really going to work for you, and commit to improving them for at least a month and see if they become naturally ingrained, okay? So just to talk a little bit more about the trail arm again, the trail arm is in a slight bend. It's dropped more into the trail pocket, and this is, again, tough for slicers to do. Slicers typically want to get that trail elbow off the body a little bit, so make sure that you're keeping this right arm in a little bit more of a bend as you come into impact. Like, I hate this look at impact because it typically means your hands are out of control. When I say this look, I mean the right arm is very straight, the trail arm is straight. You want that to be in a little bit. Perfect examples of that would be like Lee Trevino, where his arm looks like this, and he's probably one of the straightest golfers of all time. So I mentioned the arc wider in the backswing, collapse it in the downswing. Just keep an eye on that. If you can see that little bit of an arc collapse, like Sergio Garcia would be a perfect example of that. So in summary, this is lesson number 5 now. We've talked about the grip, stance and the posture, the first part of the swing, the second part of the swing, summary and review, and this kind of just goes over lessons 1 to 4, but then he also talks a little bit of some mental tips. Hogan was big on keeping a notebook after every session, and he would write down what he learned. And this is what I do at the end of every lesson that I work with a client, whether it's online or whether it's in person. At the end of an online lesson, I'll record a voice note to send to them of all the key points that I want them to work on, usually about 4 to 5 key cues. And I am going to use that for myself personally for the next lesson, so I can hold my client accountable to make sure that we're not, going and grasping at straws and working on all this other fancy stuff on YouTube. And then also it just allows for them to really make sure that they have a pathway. And I'll usually put in the lesson notes, I do this more for people who tend to jump around with swing concepts. Like let's say, we worked on shutting their hands for half an hour. I'll put this in big cap locks as priority number 1. Like this is what you need to work on, and this is all you need to focus on. So I would recommend for you, keep a notebook, and after every session, write down what you learned, write down what you felt with your swing. And a big one too is really making sure that you have a miss chart, which we'll talk about in a second. So for Hogan, it's interesting, like his self-doubt never subsided. He just worked through it. So he always felt, even up until he was done his career, that there was a little bit of self-doubt in his game. And I think that self-doubt drives you forward. It really drives you forward to find solutions for your game. So as long as you don't let it run wild, like you want to have that little bit of sense of doubt and a little bit of sense of curiosity, and always kind of ask yourself, is there a move that I can add to my swing? It's just important to go out to the golf course and not add, 5 or 6 things that you're trying to work on. Or like, the worst one that I get is on, holes 1 to 3, I thought about this, and then holes 4 to 10, I thought about this, then holes 11 to 18, I kind of gave up and just swung. And then all of a sudden from holes 11 to 18, they played their best golf of the day. So commit to one swing thought. I think it was Byron Nelson who talked about having one swing thought in his record year. I can't say that enough. Like if you commit to just one swing thought throughout the whole year, you're probably gonna be much better off, and you're gonna be able to just have a pathway that your swing can follow. So this is probably the most important part of this book, and I'm just gonna read a quote directly from Hogan. And he said this right here. So I had stopped trying to do many great difficult things perfectly because it had come clear in my mind that this overambitious overthrowness was neither possible nor advisable or even necessary. Like that's it right there. And this is, I think, the big problem in modern day instruction is that there's just too much junk going on in people's brains, and it's locking them up and not allowing them to drop into flow state and play amazing golf. And Hogan realized that, he needed to keep it simple. Like, and this is another quote from him here too. All it takes to create great golf is to execute a small number of true fundamental movements. And it's just understanding what is your fatal flaw. And if you have really keen awareness on what that fatal flaw is, it becomes much easier to fix it. And this is kind of goes into the miss chart that I mentioned before. Like school yourself in terms of what are your misses, and always write this in lesson notes if someone's really struggling with their misses and they're struggling with understanding why it's happening, right? Like if there's typically going to be 3 to 4 misses a golfer will deal with, typically, most likely 2. So if you're seeing a chunk and a thin, let's say that's your weight shift. So if you hit it chunky or thin, okay, my weight shift was off. And if you hit a little bit of a hook, okay, I know I over released my hands a little bit too much. And okay, if I saw the block, I'm not rotating my shoulders enough and getting through it. So you can use those 3 as your miss chart. And if you see 3 hooks in a row, you're like, okay, I know I'm over releasing my hands. I need to stabilize my lead arm a little bit more. And then it becomes much easier to work your way out of a slump. And that is one big thing for me, is making sure that people don't get caught in slumps, and you just have that miss chart that can be your guide. And it will change over time too. So, biggest thing too, I'll end off on with the miss chart and just the mental side of the game is, golfer A who doesn't really care for the miss chart, and they're just out there to try and find a feel on the driving range. They hit 5 shanks in a row. They get really upset. They try and work their way out of a bad range session. They hit more balls. They grab another bucket. I'm sure you've been there. I've been there before myself. What the hell is going on? I don't know how to fix it. And you come out and you maybe got through the battle a little bit, but you don't exactly know what you did to fix it. You just felt your way through it. Can work sometimes, and that's the whole digging out of the dirt concept. And then golfer B is really informed on their misses. Like they know on a deep level that if they shank it, their hands are way too open and their weight is a little bit too far back, and the club kicks out and then they hit it in the heel. So the informed golfer, he just realized, okay, I'm not setting my wrist correctly, and he'll strive to drill it for the remainder of the session, maybe slow themselves down a little bit, and they know that they've built that pathway a little bit more efficiently. So that's it for Ben Hogan. His 5 lessons, I think some of the most important lessons that you'll ever have for your game. Follow them very closely if that's the framework you want to go off of. I always think though that you have to have more of a nuanced approach to your swing if you really want to push it to that great level. So if you're needing help with your swing, I'd love to help you out. Next week, we're going to talk about Mo Norman and the genius of Mo Norman. I'm loving working on these historical characters. I hope you are too, because really, I firmly believe that we have all the secrets to this game. There's not much more for us to discover. They're in the past, and now we're just getting to measure them in the future.